So much for joining us for what we normally call our Access to Care Learning Collaborative, where we normally focus on scope of practice issues and access to care issues pertaining to advanced practice registered nurses. But because of the major crisis that's occurring with the RNs leaving the field, including now we're understanding newer RNs leaving the field, we thought it would be very important to address that topic. And we have 5 wonderful guests with us today. I'm going to let our moderator, Dr. Jim Ballinghoff from the UPenn Health System, introduce everybody. I do want to let you know that we are recording today's discussion. I will be sharing this recording online, and I'm going to ask everybody who is not a presenter to please mute your microphones and video, and I will be doing the same. So Jim, take it away, and thank you to all of our guest speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Quinn, for this opportunity. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jim Ballinghoff. I'm the Chief Nurse Executive for the University of Pennsylvania Health System. So we are at an inflection point in the healthcare industry, and this conversation with thought leaders in our profession couldn't be more timely. We're faced with many challenges, and challenges open up opportunities to develop creative solutions. And this is something we as nurses are good at. I think it's important for us to recognize how we got to the position we are in today and how it happened so rapidly. Nursing shortages are nothing new. They are somewhat cyclical, and we've been preparing for this over the years. However, we were not prepared for this staffing shortage, which reached far beyond nursing as a result of the recent pandemic. When the pandemic first hit,
everyone, you gotta mute.
Yeah, if everyone could just please.
Including our guests who are not talking yet, if you could mute. Thank you.
Okay, so when the pandemic first hit, we were unsure of how this virus was transmitting, how to treat it, and how to care for our patients and our communities. But as always, we met the challenge, we pivoted quickly, we tested models of care, we implemented innovative strategies, and we slowly found our footing and were able to make a positive impact in a short period of time. However, it was quite scary and challenging to say the least. And during that time, based on what we were seeing happening in New York City, we knew our older nurses, our older, more seasoned nurses were vulnerable. Our nurses who had pre-existing conditions were vulnerable. Our younger nurses were concerned that the virus could have an impact on their fertility. We got dressed and undressed in our garages in fear we would potentially transmit this to our families. Well, those fears helped expedite early retirements. We also saw newer nurses leave the profession due to safety concerns like never before. And this created an acute staffing shortage, and that provided an opportunity for staffing agencies to come in and help fix the situation at a very high cost to organizations. And this further exacerbated the staffing shortage. It created an opportunity for nurses to leave their organizations and take on travel assignments where they could make unprecedented hourly rates. And in this economy, who could blame them? I had 75 nurses resign in 1 week to take advantage of this opportunity, 33 of them from critical care. And when a nurse leaves, you typically get 3 to 4 weeks notice. And it can take from 3 months up to a year to get a position posted, interviewed, onboarded, oriented, and productive. That left us with so many openings. And with burnout being so prevalent in our profession, even more nurses took advantage of those openings and moved around the organization or to other organizations to try new areas of specialty or get better schedules. Organizations had to backfill with agency nurses, overtime, and high-cost incentives, even further exacerbating the problem. The good news is we're starting to see a stabilization of the workforce. There's less movement, less travel opportunities, turnover rates and vacancy rates are coming down, but the issues are not resolved and the shortage is not over. By 2030, the US Bureau of Labor Statistics projects that more than 275,000 additional nurses will be needed from our current baseline. There are currently approximately 1 million registered nurses older than 50 years old, out of a total just over 4 million, meaning 1/4 of the workforce could be at a retirement age in the next 10 to 15 years. In 6 years, in 2029, the last of the baby boomer generation will reach retirement age, resulting in a 73% increase in Americans 65 years of age and older, which is a high utilization time for healthcare needs. Access to care is going to be an ever-increasing challenge. Our esteemed panel of healthcare executives are going to share with us potential solutions that can help us combat these challenges through commitment, innovation, and creativity. And it's now my pleasure to introduce our panel of experts. Dr. Karren Drenkard is the Senior Fellow at the Public Policy Institute at AARP. Welcome, Karren. Dr. Katie Boston-Leary is the Director of Nursing Programs at the American Nurses Association. Welcome, Katie. Dr. Ann Gross is the Senior Vice President of Patient Care Services and Chief Nursing Officer at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, Harvard Teaching Hospital. Welcome, Ann. And Dr. Karen Kowalski is the founder and CEO of Kowalski and Associates and professor at Texas Tech University School of Nursing. So welcome to our panelists. I'm going to start with Karren Drenkard and give you the first question. In your role as Senior Fellow working with Susan Reithart at AARP's Public Policy Institute, you are addressing the current nursing workforce shortage. I understand that to further the discussion, you held conversations with several top nursing leaders that were anonymous but able to be shared. Can you share the themes that came across from those conversations about their ideas to address the nursing shortage crisis that we are facing?
Thank you so much, Jim. And as Dr. Quinn said, during May, a lot of national studies and reports were released about the state of the nursing workforce. They included American Association of Colleges of Nursing, NCSBN, the American Nurses Association released their recommendations, and AARP's attention was also raised. And they have a commitment to championing nursing in America. And as part of the look at all of these data elements, they asked me to conduct a series of interviews with top nursing leaders to really focus on solution and strategies, not to rehash the data. So the questions that I asked were about what they think could be done and what role they thought all organizations could play. So as you said, the interviews were anonymous, but not confidential. So I just want to share the big themes, and I think some of the other speakers today will talk to them. Some of them are not new, but I felt the way that they categorized the ideas of what we could do were very helpful. The first was we need to change the work. And this was across the board. The work fundamentally hasn't changed except for potentially the technologies that in many ways have been more of a burden than a help. And so getting serious about new care models, really shifting towards different kinds of team-based models where the nurse is able to really practice at the top of their license. And then this concept that I also think you'll hear more about today of virtual nursing, which means leveraging the ability we have for senior nurses, experienced nurses, to be able to work shorter shifts paired up with newer nurses. I also would say that of the nurses I interviewed, having different shifts besides 12-hour shifts was consistently discussed. Having a way to be able to extend people into the workforce, which is physical work, so that they could potentially work less hours and have different kinds of work based on their level of experience and, quite frankly, their age. And then to take a serious look at the technologies that work and don't work. So changing the work was one theme. The second theme right up after it was changing the work environment. And I think if COVID taught us anything, what these nurses expressed was, we really didn't do a very good job of being ready to address the well-being of the nurse. And we need to get more serious about that. And some of the things that the younger nurses, and the scariness about them leaving, is that they have different wants and needs around the work environment. And that includes the scheduling and the benefits and, quite frankly, the time off and what they value. So changing the work environment to really be more of a healing environment, and then paying attention to what the nurses really want. The third big bucket was the image and value of the nurse in society. And this was something that the interviewee said, we need help. This is not only nursing as a professions to do. We need help from other people. So recognizing the work that nurses do, really being involved in encouraging young people from diverse backgrounds to enter a very exciting and really solid profession, but seeing it in a way that it is a valued profession, and that the image of the nurse really portrays the work that we do. The next big category was the workforce itself, and recognizing that we have an opportunity to re-engage the younger nurse in a different way, as well as re-engage the more experienced nurses, so that they can continue working, that they can continue to offer their support and wisdom, having roles that are paid, such as mentors or virtual preceptors, so that experienced nurses can find a way to transition potentially into a different role as they become more experienced. And then to a person, they talked about our process for onboarding new nurses. And when you see the numbers of nurses less than 40 that want to leave the workforce, it does mean that we have to really pay attention to our onboarding process, which is expensive, but is really important. And so a lot of the people that I interviewed that had experience from the academic side talked about how important the transition to practice really is, and evaluating what works. And then there was two last areas. One was the distinct opportunity that we have to increase both the number and the diversity of the nursing workforce. But we can't do that just by wishing. So reaching into communities and schools at early ages, as early as 7th and 8th grade, supporting career progression of people that come into a caring profession but maybe don't have the means to continue, and really putting them on a career pathway and supporting them through scholarships and loan programs. Again, saying that it needs to be a multi-organizational, societal initiative to really help people progress in their careers, and recommending things like talking to big industries and employers so that they can focus their tuition benefits into these professions. And then lastly, because it was AARP, there was quite a bit of consultative advice about policy advocacy, even things like the role that other organizations and potentially AARP could play, like educating consumers on what a nurse really does and how valuable they are, expressing gratitude and respect to nurses as a consumer in their unique role in healthcare, and then really looking at potentially engaging with the media, sharing the value of a nurse, encourage careers in nursing, and really look at this as not just a problem that nursing has to solve, but as a local, regional, and national issue that, quite frankly, many of the interviewees called a crisis, and a crisis for public health. So in many, many ways, not everything is new, but it does require a multifaceted approach. There will not be a silver bullet, and we really need to come together to figure out how to solve it. And I'll just leave with this. One of the quotes from one of the people I interviewed said, "This is our time to create an even brighter future for nursing." So that lifted me up and gave me optimism, as opposed to feeling defeated by this, because I do believe we have the right people here at the right time to be able to make this work. So thank you, Jim.
Yeah, thank you, Karren. I'm sure there are lots of heads nodding out there as you went through all of the different learnings and the different buckets of opportunities. And I'm sure we're going to get into more of those buckets as we speak to our other panelists. This next question is for Katie. The American Nurses Association has boldly looked at the many intersecting issues occurring in healthcare delivery, particularly on how these issues are impacting nurses and nursing care. Most, if not all, of the efforts the ANA has conducted have been in coalition with other national organizations. Please provide our audience with an overview of the National Nurse Staff Think Tank and the ANA and others launched in 2022, and what those other organizations were that you worked with, and what was the purpose of the think tank?
Sure. Thank you for that question, Jim, and thanks for that wonderful introduction, and thank you to ARP for hosting us. And hosting this discussion. So ANA went to work, and I'll start with 2017. That's when the Partners for Nurse Staffing was formed. That's when we would say that we were in a shortage, but now we're saying that we're in a crisis state in terms of nurse staffing and our workforce. So this group has been together for some time. This group includes ANA, the American Nurses Association, AONL, the American Organization of Nursing Leadership, IHI, the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, HFMA, the Healthcare Financial Management Association, and AACN, the American Association of Critical Care Nurses. We decided that we wanted to do something rather urgently, particularly with what we were seeing during the pandemic in terms of the staffing crisis that we're in. So Jim, the example that you gave with having 75 nurses resign within that finite period of time is a real issue, right? Because when you have resignations, usually you get 2 weeks notice if they're frontline, and then it could take you months to over a year to hire someone at that caliber, and sometimes not even at that level of competency that you lost. So we felt that we had to go to work and put together some recommendations to come with some solutions that could be quick acting, right? Things that we can help leaders determine, put in place within 12 to 18 months, while we also keep in our view what we need to work on for more long-term sustainable solutions, so we can stop being in this place of instability with our nursing workforce. So we formed a think tank, a diverse group of nurses and non-nurses from across the country, patient advocates, HR, CEOs, nurses at all levels that were involved, CFOs that were involved with coming up with these recommendations. We came up with 6 recommendations that we need to focus on with priority, and some of these you hear very similar to what Karren just shared. First, starting with building a healthy work environment. That's number 1. That's the foundation for us to be able to retain our nurses. 2, diversity, equity, inclusion is a strategy to sustain the workforce and also build a new one. We know that nursing is not as diverse as it needs to be. And I know that, we're talking about engaging people in marginalized communities and minoritized communities to be a part of nursing. But let's also look at the schools of nursing to make sure that they are allowing these folks to come in, and they're not being weeded out once they get there. Secondly, work schedule flexibility, where we are hearing from nurses that they want something different, not just the 3 days, 12 hours, and work overtime when we can't fill shifts. They would like to see some of the flexibility they see in other industries. And then stress injury continuum, and making sure that we're addressing burnout, moral distress, and compassion fatigue, and all the other word salad concepts that indicate that nurses are not well. And make sure that we keep this front and center and break the stigma about the fact that it's not okay. To say that it is okay to be not okay. Because there is the old adage of you have to be tough. There's something floating around that Florence Nightingale, in one of her ads years ago, indicated that the meek need not apply. We need to do away with that thinking as it relates to our nurses. 4th, innovative care delivery models was also an area where we focused on, where we have to have a holistic approach to care. We actually developed and designed a tribrid approach to designing a care delivery model, where it is boots on the ground, nurse physically in the building, surveillance in terms of IT integration and virtual nursing, which is what we'll talk about later. And then also looking at technology to alleviate work burners for nurses, right? Technology has not been so kind to nurses. So we need to really look at how it can set technology up so that it can reduce the cognitive, physical, and emotional workload that nurses endure during their times while they're working. And then lastly, but not least, total compensation. We need to make sure there's an understanding that financial well-being is a thing. Even though there's an altruistic nature to what we do, we also have bills to pay. We have families we need to care for. There's data that suggests that a lot of nurses are primary breadwinners in their families, particularly nurses of color. And most nurses have not been living above they have not been earning livable wages when you look at cost of living where they are. So you put all these things together. We develop tactics and strategies and how to measure improvement over time. And this is available for free to everyone. It's not behind a paywall. And we just developed a worksheet. So leaders can score themselves as they iteratively move through all these recommendations and implement them in their organization. So that's pretty much what we developed with the think tank. And I'll also cap it with this and saying that these recommendations that we developed was our moonshot. It was our moonshot to say, hey, you know, we've seen enough. Let's figure out how we can address all these issues. It's not all of the issues, but it's that 80-20 rule where if we can get to most of these, the other things will fall in line. Some of these recommendations are overlapping as well, but we really do believe, based on the intelligence of the folks that we assembled and all the work that we put into this, and it was over a 6-week period that we gathered folks and really worked steadily over that time period, worked with a strong think tank facilitator to get to this point. So we'll put in the chat so you can access it, so you can look at it at both, not just the recommendations, but the worksheet. And we really believe that if organizations put these recommendations in place and work through them with transparency with their team and be nurse-led in your strategization of how you can get to the other side, we can get to hopefully not only retaining top talent, but also attracting nurses that are entering the field that are new to practice and hopefully keep them.
Thank you, Katie. And that's what I was going to have a follow-up question. Where can we find your work? So you're going to put it in the chat. So thank you. Sure. That's an amazing partnership that you had. It sounds like you covered just about every organization to get their input into resolving these issues. And two things that really stood out. All of your recommendations are spot on, but one is, well-being. And, if we do not have a well workforce, it's going to be very, very difficult for us to move forward. And the second that you brought up was sustainability. If we can't find something that's sustainable, we're going to lose more and more managers, leaders who are basically working 24 hours around the clock, our charge nurses, just to find the staffing for the next shift or the next level of care or whatever that is. So it's critical that we have that well workforce and a sustainable solution. So thank you for all that you shared with us. The next question goes to Anne. And Anne, could you tell us about the recruitment and retention strategy you put in place at Dana-Farber? And first, why did you do this? And then what changes did you make with your plan as time progressed?
Sure. Thank you, Jim, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to AARP for hosting us this afternoon on this important topic. I would say at Dana-Farber, we were really responding to projections about the nursing shortage in our country and projections from the U.S. Census Bureau about the changing U.S. population in the coming decades. And so as we began working more intently on our recruitment and retention strategies, I'd say back in 2016, our goals were really to increase our overall numbers of nurses in our ranks and to increase the diversity of the nursing workforce in our organization. We have experienced tremendous growth here. We are a specialty hospital, cancer center, NCI designated cancer center. And even through the pandemic, we have expanded our footprint across the state, opening regional practices and so on. And, you know, part of this volume growth is about, and I think it's, you see this in other aspects of the healthcare system, but the aging of the US population and the fact that cancers are largely diseases of aging people. So in addition, we began planning for the retirements of our nurses who are part of the baby boomer generation because over the last decade, they have made up about 20% of our nursing workforce. And of course, so we needed to prepare. And as been said, some of these retirements were really accelerated by the pandemic. So in the areas of recruiting, we began in 2016 to train our own. We instituted our first residency program in 2016 for newly licensed nurses and a second one in 2019. The first one focuses on training newly licensed nurses in care of patients on clinical trials in oncology, and the other is focused on recruiting diverse talent to the outpatient cancer care setting through a partnership that we have with the University of Massachusetts, Boston, which is the most diverse college of nursing in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We also initiated a very robust task force with our human resource colleagues, talking about a lot of things that have been said here, looking at compensation reviews, making market adjustments, and really making sure that we were paying the nursing workforce appropriately for all that they were doing. We've really increased our presence in a lot in social media and professional organizations, again, to really expand our recruitment efforts. And then as the pandemic took over and we began trying to be more and more creative, we expanded our criteria around hiring and hired nurses without oncology experience through a fellowship program we instituted that provided 6 months of training in the specialty of oncology. I will say that our NLN, our residency programs, are 1 year of protected training and education in oncology. We start that work in the universities, in the colleges of nursing we work with. We start working as students or undergraduates, but I really fully agree with the point of needing to start all that work for further upstream. Our efforts in retention have been, again, on the theme of what some have already said, really working with, looking at our staff, meeting with them, trying to find what is it that they're looking for. And so there's scheduling flexibility, especially for those just coming into the nursing workforce who are interested in a different level of work-life balance. Interestingly, although some feel like the 12-hour shift is out, others want that 12-hour shift so that they're complete their work in fewer days. We have weekend programs that offer greater financial incentives and have begun implementing remote work opportunities where possible. And interestingly, in the middle of the pandemic, we eliminated all use of travel nurses. And I know this was kind of a bold step on our part, but we realized that in our nursing environment, it was more and more demeaning to our very long time loyal nursing staff to be working alongside travel nurses who were, just here for a short time and making so much more than they were. So we developed and implemented a float pool with lots of incentives to join it, but they are our permanent staff. And so the incentives are not so much around compensation as they are, again, lifestyle, when you work, where you work, et cetera. And over time, we have then gone into further areas, having conducted and hosting what we call welcome tables with our staff to learn about the experience of working at Dana-Farber. And we've, with particular focus on our entry-level staff in roles such as patient care assistants and clinical assistants. These employees in our organization are among our most diverse group and often have significant socioeconomic challenges. And by hosting these welcome tables and talking with them, we learned a lot about their career aspirations and dreams and about the barriers they felt in achieving them. So we have worked to develop a program that's multi-pronged to support these employees of our own, many of them longtime employees with us, to be able to achieve that career dream and aspiration. We've given them work schedules to support them being able to go to school and work. We have, through fundraising, I spend quite a bit of my time fundraising these days, gotten stipends to support them while in school, to buy things like a laptop, etc. We have full tuition scholarships for our clinical assistants. And then adding on to that, we have created a mentoring program so that as soon as a clinical assistant of ours enters nursing school, they have a mentor who is really focused on supporting their success in managing work and studying at the same time. So in doing that over the last 3 years, we have significantly decreased our turnover in these patient care assistant and clinical assistant groups. We've actually filling positions and have reduced that. We had a 35% turnover rate, and it's down to 15% now. And we have growing numbers of clinical assistants and patient care assistants in school, in nursing school. And then our hope is, and the plan is, to enroll them in our residency programs and hire them into permanent jobs as nurses when they finish school. We've also seen RN turnover begin to come down as well. We were never quite as high as the national average, but we are coming back down to our pre-pandemic rates. And I'll just say one other thing is that we're really working on strengthening our partnerships with schools of nursing in the Boston area. One area particularly is with undergraduate students in our cancer care equity program, but really across the board. And I think it's significant. It's a significant strategy for supporting our colleagues in academia, while we also are able to benefit by from those partnerships of having students, introducing them to the field of oncology nursing.
Thank you, Anne. Really great points. I know for us, when we first got hit with these shortages, we focused so much on recruitment, we forgot about the retention piece. And more people were going out the back door as we were focused on getting them in the front door. And you brought up a point that Katie also brought up that I don't think we talk enough about. I think we shy away from it, and that's around compensation, and making sure that our nurses are compensated for the high level of work that they do. And we tend to shy away and say, well, it's not all about that. And it's not all about compensation. It really is about the work environment. It's about well-being, so many different things. But and I think, Katie, you made this point. We have, registered nurses who are not able to, basically feed their families at this point, and that shouldn't be, in our profession. So thank you very much for all you shared, Anne. The next question goes to Karren Kowalski, and can you tell us about your HRSA grants and your Department of Labor studies you had several years ago? And what was the reason you applied for them? And what did the grants do? And what were your outcomes? You're on mute, Karren.
Thank you, Jim, and thanks to all of our participants who are anxious to know what to do about this. I think maybe I have a little bit of the historical perspective because I was in the shortages that were around the year 2000. And so what we were doing was looking at what we could do to help in terms of those shortages. And at that point, I had several HRSA grants at Rush. And so I went to do a review of applicants, and they said, oh, we have this big pot of money, and we really think we're afraid nobody's going to apply for it. And so I came back to Colorado and had lunch with Sharon Pappas and said, you know what, we need to get a hold of some of this money. So she introduced me to this little fledgling group called the Colorado Center for Nursing Excellence. And the CEO was a social worker and had no idea about how to write the grant, but she gave me secretarial support. And so we cranked this out in about 6 weeks. And what we used was Edward Deming's Toyota system model. And that's sort of like the precursor to the lean programs and black belts and all of those. And so we actually looked at helping nurses figure out how could they get rid of non-nursing activities so that they could spend more time with patients. And that's what that program was all about. And it was incredibly successful, I think primarily because we didn't just go in and talk to the staff. We went in and supported the frontline leaders in having us do this work. And so consequently, the frontline leaders got a 3-day workshop on helping them look at how they were performing and how they were working with their team. I think at the same time, we really focused on how these nurses could get rid of tasks that weren't about them. And I worry a lot today as a magnet appraiser and going to see facilities, I worry a lot about all the non-nursing duties that nurses still are forced to participate in, primarily because when we have bad economic times, what we do is we cut support staff and we cut those kinds of things that really help nurses get work done. So I don't want us to lose sight of that because I think we still need to focus on that in terms of developing a culture which really works for nurses in terms of retention and retaining them in the workplace. In 2005, then, this wonderful social worker had a lot of contacts with the Department of Labor. And so we looked at our data on where the faculty shortages were. And believe it or not, at that point, they were clinical faculty. And so we developed a 40-hour course to prepare staff nurses to take rotations of students and to actually be their primary supervisor and primary assistant faculty in terms of helping them. And of course, the students loved it because they thought they were being taught by real nurses, and they really felt that this was a positive kind of thing because those nurses knew everything instead of someone coming in from the outside. They knew all the policies and procedures. They knew where to park. They knew how to do the electronic health record. They knew all of that kind of stuff. And so it was a very positive experience. And believe it or not, today, most of the hospitals in Denver do not allow rotations of students to come in if they're not taught by their own people, their own staff who are clinical scholars. And I think at this point, probably the center has educated maybe 1,800 clinical scholars over those years. And so consequently, it really helped with this incredible shortage in terms of faculty. And let's face it, we're not going to get more nurses into the workforce if we don't have more faculty. And so a lot of these staff nurses discovered that they really liked teaching. And so they were very interested in going on for a master's or a doctorate in terms of being an educator. And so that really helps us, I think, in terms of meeting the nursing shortage. I think too, we really need to think about leadership. And I learned this from our first grant, because if we don't spend time, particularly on frontline leaders and the director level, so that they are really coaching and mentoring staff and spending time with staff, I don't think we get retention the way we need to. And so consequently, what I've seen in magnet facilities as I've gone across the country is I've seen cultures that actually look at what I would call a family atmosphere. And so they have, as Anne was speaking to, they have strong mentors. And these nurses have gone to mentoring classes, so they know exactly how to do that. And that means you have to have a very strong professional development staff in your institution. And that's the other thing that gets cut whenever there's an economic downturn. And so I think that when you look at those issues in terms of what we learned in those grants, is that it really makes a lot of difference when we pay attention to the culture, we pay attention to leadership, and we support staff in a way that makes sense in terms of them not having to do non-nursing duties.
Thank you, Karren. Really great points. One, the lean processes. I feel like every day we're adding something to the plate of the nurse, particularly when it comes to the electronic record. And, let's collect this data, let's collect that data. And we're not looking at how many of these fields that we're documenting in that we're not using at all, or how many times are we multiple documents of the same thing. And there's a huge opportunity there. You also touched on the faculty shortages, and Anne touched on the academic practice partnerships. I co-chair a practice partnership with Dr. Rosemary Palomano from the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing. And, one of the ideas that we've discussed is around hybrid models. And to your point, nurses love to educate, they want to be a part of that, but some might not be able to either go to that income level, or they might not be able to get the benefits that they need from that particular school. But if we can somehow, like maybe you work 2 12s or 3/8, whatever it is, at your organization, you get full-time benefits, but then you work at the school through a partnership for that other, and within your facility to train and recruit. It's a recruitment strategy as well to get new nurses. So we really got to think about that, but really great points. Thank you there. Yeah.
So Jim, I would just add that the way we set it up was that schools paid the hospitals for the clinical scholars, and then the hospitals continued to pay the nurses, and they were given carved out time to educate the students, but they kept their benefits because the hospital still supported their benefits. So it was a win-win on both sides, and it's a really positive way to expose nurses to teaching and education.
That's great. Karren Drenkard, I'm going to circle back to you. You had several roles before your current one with the AARP, including as a CNO for the Inova Health System in Northern Virginia. With everything that you are learning from the interviews you conducted and the recent conversations you're having with many nursing leaders, as well as any research you're reading, if you were back in your CNO role in any location, what policies and practices would you put in place?
Yeah, thank you so much. And Anne, thank you for your sort of live case study. And I applaud you for pivoting quickly to figure out how to manage the agency situation. So, well, I've been thinking a lot about this for quite a long time, and it's a multi-pronged problem. So, there is no one thing that can be done. So I sort of, in my conceptual map, I was like, what could happen short term and what could happen long term? And so we have a chance to sort of catch our breath from COVID. And so I honestly, I think the short term solutions that are very visible is where I would start. So here's some things I was thinking about if I was, and thank you for the question. So I would really look at the new nurses and the re-engaging the experienced nurses and just change some things. And I think Anne had the best example of actually changing some things. So, offering different shift hours, maybe not on every unit, but, the ED had, I had 6 EDs and a bunch of urgent care centers. They had 4 hour, 6 hour, 8 hour, 12 hour. And we figured that out based on the acuity and the volume, right? So something like that. And I think at this point in time, the length of stay, to be honest with you, is much shorter. And so you almost can think of a length of stay in the terms of hours. So I think that doing a little more differentiation of the work is kind of where I would start. So I would take a look at that. I would do right out of the gate. If I started tomorrow, I would start scheduling stay interviews to find out, why do you work here? Why would you stay? Why have you stayed? Is there anything that would cause you to leave? And I find that sometimes, and never mind COVID, but sometimes those type of interactions reveal things that maybe as managers or chief nurses, we don't want to hear. But even talking to the nurse managers, like, what are their career aspirations? Why do you stay here? Why are you? And figure that out so you can do more of the same, right? So that's very soft. It's a soft intervention, but you can really determine the risk of flight on pretty much every area that you have. The other thing I do, and I don't know if, Anne, you're in Boston, so I had the opportunity several years ago to visit Mass General many times and see Dr. Jeanette Ives Erickson, and she was one of the first that had these innovation units. And so, for me, I had 75 inpatient units, picking 4 to 6 units where the leader was an innovator, actually begin to hire nurses who like change, and figure out a couple of models that could be tested out to really reimagine and reinvest in nursing. And to the point of Karren with 2 R's, there's still a lot of nursing tasks assigned to nurses. And one of the biggest things is they're still hunting and gathering a lot. And there's a lot of negotiation between like materials management. And I always feel like in every support to the nurse, they forget about the last 10 feet. So it's like a lot of time spent hunting and gathering. Then these are short term, I would totally redesign the orientation model. One of the best things I've seen, Jim, is a dedicated orientation unit where you put your new nurses, like they're hiring like 100 new grads into 5 dedicated orientation units, and they go there for the first 6 to 8 weeks just to learn the basics, and they're staffed that way. And then the peer support groups. And then what I like to think of, like, we give wraparound support. I'm an old oncology nurse too, and we do a lot of wraparound support for oncology patients, wraparound support for the chief nurse, and that kind of, not the chief nurse, listen, the chief nurse too, maybe, but the new nurse, we need wraparound support too. But for the new nurses, and the well-being model is one of the best, is like, and I saw this at Luminous Health in Maryland. They had a well-being program that looked at career well-being, but also social, financial, physical, and safety, community well-being. And they looked at all of those things to be able to make changes through their shared governance, which I thought was, great. The other best sort of thing I saw that I think started up during COVID, but had a lot of merit, was at Mainline Health in Pennsylvania. Barbara Wadsworth her team created this psychological first aid team of peers that was a peer-to-peer network, and they went through training and response. They weren't all psych nurses, but they went through first aid response if a nurse was having an especially difficult day, so that they could, to your point about Katie, the meek shall not apply. Like, why are we the only profession that can't say we're hurting inside and we need help? And then I just had 2 longer term things, just because I think they take a little bit of time to build relationships. But the academic practice partnerships, AACN and AONL, have put a really good set of criteria together to say how to deepen those relationships, changing the clinical practicum model, really just partnering with your foundations to raise money together. The idea of clinical scholars, Karren, believe it or not, there are clinical nurses who do like to teach and might end up being a faculty pipeline. So those are good. And then same thing, when I was at Inova, we did a summer camp for 7th and 8th graders, and I got a grant. It didn't cost that much to run. I think it was $50,000 a summer. And I got a lot of questions about, like, why are you going to, what is the point of 7th and 8th graders? But I'll tell you, we tracked that data for 10 years, and just about 75% of those youngsters that went through the camp ended up becoming nurses. Now, they were already had an interest, but we really taught them about what it was really like. And we partnered with the school. We went to the simulation lab. We went to the PT therapy lab. They got to see like all the different kinds of nursing. And my sense, what I answered back to the skeptics was, if I can have just children educated about what nurses do, that will help the whole community, right? So those kind of things. And lastly, I would just say, as the chief nurses, the strength we have to show and the willingness that chief nurses need to put forward with their chief financial officers to say, we will give you the money back tenfold if you just don't forget to invest in what we need. And so if I had any advice at all, I would say nurture that relationship. And really, so much so that I moved my office to be next to the CFO so that I would have serendipity meetings on a regular basis. It's after, with your HR partner and your financial partner, that is really, who you need to partner with. So those are my thoughts. And thanks for asking that question.
Yeah.
I feel a little not legitimate, but I do come by way of experience. So, and respect for the people who are in those roles still. So thank you for that.
Thank you for that. And I like the way you're breaking it down. We tend to want to try to boil the ocean, which can be overwhelming. And by looking at it as what are the short-term solutions we can focus on, and then what are the long-term, it just makes it a little bit more palatable. I love the concept of a dedicated orientation unit. We have a nursing education enhancement day because we've hired more new to practice nurses than we ever have. And we find that they don't have the confidence, they don't have the skill set, and no fault of their own. They went through school during a pandemic. They didn't get exposed to the clinical settings like many of us did when we went through school. And I think, based on that, having a dedicated orientation unit is a great concept. I want to ask you a question, and then anybody else can also jump in. You talked about the flexible scheduling, which I think is critical. You've seen that in all of the literature out there. And you described, the emergency department, which I think it could very easily work well in an emergency department. But when you think about a med-surg unit or a critical care unit, I was reading one article where they were saying you need to let the nurses, if they want to come in at 8 and at 9 and at 10, but obviously they were never a scheduler. And I know, like, even when I was a manager of a unit and we had a choice, 8 or 12-hour shifts, we allowed people to choose based on seniority. And there were a lot of days where it was very difficult to marry that 8-hour shift from 3 to 7 in the afternoon. And it ended up being a stretch assignment, or the charge nurse picked up the role, because it was a little bit, it sounds really great in concept, but not as easy to operationalize always. So I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts around that, and anybody else after Karren.
Yeah, so thank you so much. So first of all, I need to give credit to the dedicated orientation unit, to one of your colleagues, Jim, Robert Wood Johnson, Barnabas in New Jersey. They're the ones that started that but let me just say this, and we've been, and I guess given where you are generationally, right? The focus in the last 25 or so years on sort of this primary nursing meant that the assignments were set and rigid, right? If we differentiated the activities, so I wrote a paper about this, and I put in place an admission nurse, and it was during the highest hours of admission. So it wasn't like you had to take an assignment from someone else. You came in, you saw what was on the board, and you did 5 admissions in 4 hours, right? The discharge, that was people that could or would work in the later part of the day. In the morning, I hired, these were on my innovation units, but mothers of young children, the bus took them away at 8:30. They come in at 9. They're the discharge nurse till 1. They do the discharge. Discharges take between 1 and 2 hours. And right, so it's like, it sucks away if you have 5 patients or whatever you have. So giving some of these tasks away. And, I worked in the VA at the beginning of my career, and, you did all the medications for the whole unit. And that was a lift if you were the patient, the nurse taking care of the patient. So I just think we should, I'm not saying I have the answer to it, but I think we should test some of these things out and figure out how much it costs and figure out how satisfied people are. And if it works, like, we should be a little more open to different ways. And we can certainly, I was always very transparent with the patients, but I'll tell you, the feedback I got was I would rather have someone competent that knows what they're doing. I don't really care if an extra, because if you have been in the hospital lately, I'm telling you, you're going to see a dozen people anyway. You just do, right?
Yeah.
So might as well make sure it's the person who's the best at what they do.
Before I move on, does anyone else want to comment on that, or?
I think there is. Go ahead, Anna. I'll heed to you because you're in that space, so I'll heed to you.
Well, I loved Karen's suggestions, and I think the only thing I would add to it, and I think she was really alluding to this anyway, but I think our staff have the answers to these questions, and I think as leaders, we have to sit down with them and think creatively. And it depends on the area, it depends on what kind of care you're providing, of how flexible you can be when. But for me, for example, running a unit, a lot of cancer care is provided in the outpatient setting. So I have a 10-hour intense treatment that, those are the kind of patients that it might appeal to somebody who actually wants a 12-hour shift, likes the 12-hour shift, and wants to get their 3 days done so they could teach or do something else. Whereas, in our lab services, our phlebotomy, accessing ports, starting lines, et cetera, you can do those mother's hours, et cetera. But I do think our staff, they know the setting, they know our patients' needs, and they if they're engaged and we are open as leaders to innovating, I think the answers are there.
Thanks. Katie, did you want to?
No, and that's exactly what I was going to say. We have to engage the nurses to help figure this out. But so the only other thing I'll add is we have very antiquated paper centered processes for scheduling. And we have to automate that system and make it easy, in addition to working with nurses on these solutions.
Well, thank you for that. Katie, I'm going to come back to you. Will the think tank continue its work, or we transition to an updated strategy?
Yeah, so the think tank is sunsetted. They met from January through March of 2022. And then we decided, because remember, the think tank focused on short-term, low-hanging fruit type of action, relative, by the way. But we knew that there was more work to do to get us to a place of addressing some of the perennial issues that keeps us here, where this has just been an unstable workforce, to Karren's point, for decades. So we wanted to take a stab at addressing that. We set up a different group, but some carryover from the think tank work. But same diverse group. We added a representative from Joint Commission, a labor representative, so we can really get to how we can do some policy work to finally address all the issues that we've been seeing in nursing with this workforce. So this group met starting, I think, September of 22, finalized our recommendations in April of 23, and we developed recommendations that are more policy oriented. And I did put the link to that in the chat. So that's where we look at issues related to the fact that we need to address the value of nurses, and the fact that that's something that needs to be addressed, where we can start seeing how some of the things that were mentioned earlier, where nursing is looked at as an expense. How do we get the nursing profession, what we contribute to healthcare, seen as a contribution that's more on the revenue side? Not that we're suggesting that every nurse should get a check, by the way, because when we say that, that's one of the things that we hear first. Wait a minute, is that you're suggesting that nurses bill for their own services? All nurses, we know APRNs do that. But we feel that with the way our payers manage our reimbursement and our revenue, there's an opportunity there to capture what nurses contribute as well. We also worked on some recommendations to reform the work environment that ties to a healthy work environment, where we need to have strong, empowered governance committees. Maybe some of what we thought with shared governance needs to be revisited, right? Where we look at how some of what nurses struggle with in the profession can go up to the board level in terms of their understanding and engagement for what nurses need, and not simply rely on what CNO reports, the traditional methods of sharing what is impacting nursing with the board. Secondly, third, we talked about innovation again, because that's a revisit from our think tank work, but we feel that there's more work to do there, because we've heard a lot from CNOs that they want to innovate, but they're hearing from their CFOs that get your budget in line and then we can innovate. So we really want to make sure that we emphasize that there's an important element here in addressing innovation with care delivery. Make sure there's research to make sure that we have the right care delivery models in place, because we realized that that was a gap for us with previous models. And also invest in innovation, and also look at reducing physical and cognitive workload of nurses. I put in the chat the study that we did with McKinsey, where nurses gave feedback on what they spend most of their time doing in each shift, and what ideally they'll like to do less of and more of on each shift. So that's important information that we can be armed with to look at how we can deliver care differently. What could be more tech-enabled, or what can be delegated, right? So those are all things that are opportunities as well. Next, we looked at staffing standards to ensure quality care, and how we can really develop staffing standards. I know Andrea put a question in the chat. We're not suggesting a one-size-fits-all. That's not going to work. But there has to be a way for us to look at how we can have some legislative power to make sure, at a minimum, there are staffing-led committees where nurses at the front line are leading those committees to help with being involved with how staffing is set up in the institutions where they work. And then lastly, regulatory efficiency. We all know that a trip to boards of nursing is not a fun trip. In some cases, it feels like going to the DMV or the MVA. And the fact that a number of our boards of nursing, the way they're set up, those are not run by nurses. So we need to look at that, look at how scopes of practice needs to be revisited, remove barriers to full scope of practice for nurses and APO and RNs and APRNs, and also look at how we can collect data to help inform us on how we can really stay ahead with addressing a lot of these workforce issues. So we continue to do work in this space to see how we can implement some of these recommendations. We have meetings with Joint Commission, and we're waiting for them to get back to us on how we can set up staffing and the leadership chapter. So there's accountability, and it's not just resting on the CNOs to manage, or even set up a national patient safety goal around staffing. We have meetings with the CDC, with the NHSN, to look at staffing standards, where they can modernize the staffing standards, where midnight census issues are put to bed, because no one likes that. Doesn't capture all that nurses do. And also look at productivity measures that work to really accentuate and emphasize what nurses do all the time. We're also working with specialty organizations. I know we did get a question about that, but with specialty organizations, how they can contribute to this conversation too, right? In terms of what they believe what recommendations should look like for safe staffing. So when you put all those things together, the work continues. We continue to knock on doors, engage a number of different players to help us get to a different place. And that is our moonshot, right? It's there's a Kennedy saying about how a lot of the issues that we struggle with, we tend to pass it off as if it's a system issue, but they're man-made. So since they're man-made, guess who can fix them? Man.
Okay.
So that's why we really focus on what we can do. And even if we don't see a lot of these changes come to bear or to bear fruit during our time, at least we can set things in the right direction for those that come after us.
And it's a moonshot, but it's a lot of the work you're doing is grassroots efforts. From your perspective through the ANA, what advice do you have for healthcare delivery leaders to help stem the flow of newer nurses from the field?
So I think, and you're talking about having more nurses enter the field. Is that your question, Jim?
Yeah.
So I think Karren mentioned it earlier, right? It's faculty, definitely we need to have that public-private partnership. We also need to think about big business. I do think there's an opportunity for big business to get into this space, and I'll never forget, I was invited to a conference that was hosted by Capital One. And when I say Capital One, I mean, what's in your wallet, Capital One? Who knew that they care about nurse staffing? But they do, because they have a lot of hedge fund folks and people that can fund a lot of starter companies that were interested in this space. And I do think that there's an opportunity for us. We talk about academic, we talk about hospital partnership, but I think that there are large organizations like Capital One, like some of those Fortune 500 companies that can help us set up more centers for learning for nurses, simulation labs, right, on site, all those things. We all know what it costs for a simulation a mannequin. It's like tens of thousands of dollars. So they can help with sponsoring a lot of these things that we struggle with, even help with some of the salary issues that we're having with faculty. And that's part of the reason why we don't get a lot of people get into academia. There are a number of things we can do creatively. We need to engage a lot of different partners that we've never engaged before to help open this up. Because that's where the pinch is. It's not just with faculty, but with clinical appointments too. So we have to make sure, and clinical site rotation. So we have to figure out how we can open up that pinch point so that we get more nurses. Because I think if we flood the market with more nurses, and there's a lot of interest of people that want to get in the profession, that would help get us to the other side while we're working on retention issues. But we also need to automate on the other side, because nursing feels very industrial age in terms of the work that we do. And that's part of the reason why it's not so appealing for a lot of people coming in. So we have to make sure we leverage technology appropriately, reduce a lot of the workload burden that nurses encounter every day, so that it continues its appeal that it's always had when we entered into.
Thank you for that. Great insight and great recommendations. I'm going to come back to you, Anne. What advice do you have for other nurse leaders who would like to replicate your model, and how did your strategy impact patient care and our health outcomes?
So it so happens my office is next door to the CFO as well. And he became my best friend when I eliminated travel nurses. I'll tell you that. So I think we a couple of things in terms of, I don't know if it's replicating my model or just recruiting nurses in general. We have to pay attention, I think, as Karren said, around the work environment and specifically around workplace violence. We are seeing more and more every day in a way I never saw in my career of patients committing acts of violence against nurses, and we have to end it if we want to keep them in practice. We have to support them. We have to have teams. We've developed a team de-escalation. I mean, we do a lot of de-escalation training for everyone, but we also have teams security, psychologists, others that can come to very difficult situations and support our staff in that. I think we just have to look in our own environments about our particular challenges and address them. As chief nurse, you know, I think a lot of the things Karren talked about around stay interviews, that I don't think they're so soft, those interventions. They're, you know, the cost of turnover is phenomenal. It's unsustainable. And so how do we remain visible, you know, and however that works for you? You know, I have a number of different things that I do, but it can be different in any place, but the idea of being connected to staff, understanding what they're dealing with, and partnering with them to improve. I think one other thing that we haven't talked about today too much is, with all the evidence-based practice work and quality improvement work we do, we need to take all that work one step forward. And that is asking ourselves the question, what the cost savings did this have for this organization? Because I can't tell you, the more we start doing that, the more we are able to demonstrate the value of nursing, you know, the value in terms of, you know, the economic value to the organization. I think it's really an important thing, because I think it is there, and it isn't something we have incorporated into a lot of the work we do to just take that next step. And I have to say, you know, when you go, I don't know if it's because I'm next door to my CFO or what, but if you're partnered, you know, we're all as CNOs and nurse leaders partnered with some areas of finance. They are very willing to help do analyses for us if we partner with them. And so I guess for me, it's all about partnerships. We've talked a lot about the academic partnerships. We've got to get out of, you know, and I think this is happening a lot in nursing. So but I'm just underscoring it. The partnerships with, you know, between academia and our hospitals and health systems, this partnerships among disciplines that have been siloed from each other for years. I think we have tremendous opportunity, and I think we have to be listening to these nurses as they come into our environments. I meet with our residents as often as they'll meet with me, just understand, like, how is this going? Like, what is your experience? And is it, you know, because you don't always know until you ask. And, you know, as Karren said, it's not always the easiest thing to hear, but it's better to know so you can intervene than not know, because, you know, I'm not 21 years old. I'm not entering the work environment for the first time. I didn't have my training in the middle of the pandemic where I didn't get any clinical experience. So I think we really need to listen and partner with everybody we can.
I agree with you. And you made a really good point around the violence and aggression. If we don't figure out ways to mitigate that behavior within our organizations, it's going to have a detrimental impact on our ability to bring people into this profession. You know, we go into this profession because we want to care for people. We want to make a difference, not to have confrontational situations, you know, and I see it, you know, when I talk to the nurses on med surg units. I think, you know, our emergency department nurses, our trauma unit nurses, I think they can handle it. But when you go to some of these other units, even there, you're right. But some of these other units, it's like, I was not expecting this at all, you know, and they're having a really hard time dealing with that. And you know, yeah, we can provide them resources and that support. But we got to find ways to stop the behavior, like, you know, the airline industry, you know, whether it's a no-fly list or, you know, what it is, but something has to be done in that area. Karren with 2 R's, I'm going to circle back to you. From your perspective as a nursing workforce data expert and a nursing leader, what advice do you have for hospitals, health systems, and other nursing employers to help them recruit and retain their nursing workforce? You're on mute, Karren.
I have two German Shepherds, and they tend to get excited if they hear something outside. So I'm very conscious about muting. What I'd like to say is that I have watched over the length of the pandemic, those facilities that have done well in terms of retention. And there is no question in my mind, but what the culture in those facilities is incredible in terms of support for the nursing staff. And every single time I ask a nurse, why do you stay? They say, because of my colleagues, because it's a family on our unit. And so they really feel like they're together in this. And the other thing that I noticed is that those areas that had a lot of turnover because the pay was so great in terms of travel nursing, I said to them, be careful, don't make them wrong for leaving, because they're gonna come home and you want them to come back to you. And so I encourage people to keep in touch with the folks that are leaving. Yes, do exit interviews, but also be sure you have a good email address. Send them your newsletters so that they know what's going on in your facility, so that you can actually remain in relationship with them, even though they went to get a lot of money and pay off their school debts or buy a down payment on a house or whatever, because they will probably come home. Now, I think the other thing in terms of culture is you have to think about, I circle back one more time about leadership. I mean, it is the crux of what goes on. And the days are done when we can put whoever the best clinical nurse was in a leadership position, give her nothing in terms of nothing in terms of support, and expect them to be successful. It's not going to happen, especially with how complex systems are today. And so those facilities that do well have extensive frontline leadership training programs in their facilities for those nurses. And Anne might be able to speak to that, but I'm really convinced that we have to pay attention to that, because those frontline leaders are who create the culture on their units. And I used to say, when I was in director and CEO, CNO positions, you could blindfold me, put me on the elevator, punch a button, and I could walk out blindfolded, and I could tell you what unit we were on, because the culture feels different in those units. And so I think it's really valuable to look at how we support people in those leadership positions to create a positive culture that retains staff. And so it's not just about HR, it's about how we are with each other, being in relationship, coaching, mentoring. Those are the things that I think make a difference.
We're getting close to the end. I want to make sure, we've touched on it here and there, virtual nursing, but Katie, can you share with us your insights on the concept of virtual nursing and what that impact could be on, recruitment, retention, stabilizing the workforce?
Sure. So virtual nursing is in some circles also called telehealth nursing, or I don't like saying telemedicine because it excludes the nurses.
Yeah.
But it refers to the delivery of care and services through digital communication devices and technology, using tools such as video conferencing, phone calls, messaging platforms, remote monitoring, just so that care can be provided remotely. Now, realistically, we know that particularly in the acute care setting, you're always going to have nurses in the building, right? And within the four walls. But this is not a new concept, because for most of us that have led organizations, and I think both Karens can attest to this, and Anne currently, tele-ICUs have always been there, where we've been able to provide care almost as a supplement to having nurses that were providing care physically in the building. And it was set up in an institution where I was a CNO. It accentuated care. It was a positive for patients and families. There typically is a question around, does that mean patients are on camera all the time? They never have any privacy? No, they don't. That's not the case, because the technology that I'm aware of that I use, the camera's off and you ask permission with a doorbell to ask whether it's okay to turn the camera on. And that served as another pair of eyes. We also know that a number of institutions have monitor techs, where there are techs that are in the building, some cases remote, that will monitor patients remotely, their vital signs, and they'll alert nurses about, whether patients, having some certain presentations and things like that in terms of their strips. So that's what we mean in terms of virtual nursing. There are different flavors to it. But I want to make sure that we look at it as not necessarily a new item or a new model. It's more that we're looking to expand it outside of the typical settings, because we're hearing that care in med-surg units, for example, are almost like step-down ICUs. Patients are very sick. There are not monitors on those units. So you do have this intensity that nurses are contending with that are unexpected. So we have to make sure that we set up environments where, and this is where you layer over the work flexibility opportunity for nurses, because I know at Christiana a hospital in Delaware, they have a model where nurses rotate off and on, where they'll spend a day or two for their 3 shifts that they work. Maybe they'll do 2 shifts on the unit, and then the 3rd shift probably working remotely, monitoring patients. So I think that's where you get to some of the hybrid type work settings that nurses crave, because they see that a lot of their significant others and families are doing hybrid work. They would like that too. So I think it offers that additional opportunity for nurses to relieve them of the physical burden, rely on their cognitive abilities, critical thinking, and be a support. And I think this is another model for mentoring as well, because you do find that patients are presenting very differently in very complex ways, in ways that we hadn't seen before, right? A lot of comorbidities, polypharmacy. So having nurses that are possibly retired that feel very intimidated to come back into the physical setting, they can be that eyes and ears. So I think, virtual nursing, compared to a lot of the other recommendations that we have, tends to solve a lot of the other things that we address in our recommendations, with compensation, flexible scheduling, healthy work environment, right? Because there's that collegial relationship and consultation. It addresses a lot of those other issues that we find where it could be an all boats rise solution. Expensive for sure. And there are a lot of players that are getting into this space in terms of businesses and upstart companies. But one of the things that we are possibly going to take on at ANA is to create standards around virtual nursing, to define it appropriately, to set up what it should look like as a standard of excellence across organizations, so that we can provide that guidance. But I do think it does provide an opportunity for a lot of organizations. And I do believe, with a number of interested non-healthcare folks getting into this space, I do think the price will come down, because the supply is going to go up, even though demand will be up, but the supply is going to supersede demand, particularly initially. And I think the pricing for this technology will come down.
Yeah. Thank you for taking on the standards, because that would be very helpful to all of us. And I think to your points, as this technology evolves, we're going to see new creative and innovative ways to incorporate virtual nursing into operations. Before we go, is there something I missed? This goes out to the group. Sorry, Dr. Quinn, you want to jump in?
Jim, thank you so much, and thank you to everyone. So we only do have a couple of minutes left, and people have been asking questions in the chat, and there's been dialogue. Katie has had a great dialogue about some of the issues. Somebody did raise a question of, well, what does it look like? What do solutions look like for retaining nurses from outside of the hospital setting, such as school nurses. I hadn't even thought of school nurses in relation to this. I wonder if it's actually been addressed in any of the studies from Beer House or from the forum with NCSBN. So I'm going to have to look at that. So that's a question probably we can't even answer right now. But Sheila Caldwell, a school nurse representing the NEA, has asked the question, do you foresee a reintroduction of LPNs in acute care based on virtual nursing? So thoughts about that?
The study that I put in the chat, the Care Delivery Model Insight study, gives some information on that. We're already seeing LPNs in the acute care setting. We're actually seeing that there's a scarcity there too now because there's such high demand. But the key thing is that what we don't want to see this time, which is what we've seen in the past, we bring LPNs in because we have an emergency. Once we get our numbers up, we kick them back out. We cannot do that. If we're committing to bringing LPNs in, let's stay in, let's treat them with respect and give them their due and provide opportunities for them to advance their careers. I just want to make sure I put that in the room because this tends to happen in waves and we have to respect them as nurses and not push them back out because we don't feel we need them anymore.
Jim, 3 minutes left. Is it okay if I go ahead and wrap up right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for the very rich discussion. I know my neck hurts from nodding to everybody, so thank you. I really appreciate it.
And thank you, Jim, so much. And thank you to all of our guests, along with Jim, Karren with 1 R, Karren with 2 Rs, Katie and Ann. Such an honor and a pleasure for you to join us today at AARP and the Future of Nursing Campaign for Action. Thank you for taking time out and to share your wisdom and knowledge with us. You might be hearing from me again for various activities, so be prepared for that. There have been other questions asked. There was earlier, Dr. Andrea Broussard had asked about policy solutions. Peter Reinecke, one of our consultants, is on. He posted links to that. If anyone would like a document that summarizes those links, please email me at wquinn@aarp.org. I will share it with the distribution list of the group that normally joins at this time, which is about APRN scope of practice. And if anybody would like to join the distribution list for that for that learning collaborative, again, please email me. I will also Katie, for the other documents that were shared in the, I know you shared several documents. I think 1 or 2 other people shared documents. I will also provide those and send them out to the distribution list and to anyone who emails me about them. So I think that is all for now. Again, and I would be remiss in not saying this. On behalf of the nearly 100 million individuals served by AARP, I deeply and truly thank each and every nurse for everything that you do for patients and families each and every day. So my cat thanks you too. Thank you so much. Have a great month of June, everyone.
Thank you.